it's June 27th, and we find ourselves in 1 Kings chapters 17 through 19. Now, I've always found it funny how people think that pastors are so different from regular people. The truth is, we're just like you, and we have the same struggles and the same temptations as you do, which also means that every godly thing about us that you think makes us different can be just as true about you as it is for us. This was also true about the prophets and priests in the Old Testament, including one of the greatest, Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 17, Elijah pronounced God's judgment on Ahab for his idolatry. There would be no rain in Israel until Elijah said so, which wouldn't be for another 3.5 years according to James 5:17, but Ahab didn't know that. So God tells Elijah to hide from Ahab because Ahab's upset, first by the Kerith Brook, where God provides for Elijah supernaturally by ravens, and he drinks the water from the brook until it dries up because of the drought. And then he lives with a widow and her son. God again provides for Elijah supernaturally, as well as the widow and her son, with a bottomless flour jar and bottomless oil jar. Elijah even brought her son back to life after he had died from an illness. After 3.5 years, God sends Elijah back to Ahab to let him know the rain would return soon. Elijah has a godly man named Obadiah summon Ahab for him. Now, this is not the same man who authors the book of Obadiah that we'll be reading in a few days. Chapter 18 contains the famous challenge Elijah set up to show Israel that the Lord was God, not Baal. The challenge? Follow the one true God and don't bounce back and forth between the Lord and Baal. 2 altars were prepared with sacrifices, but no one was allowed to set fire to them. Elijah and the 850 priests of Baal and Asherah could only pray to their respective deities for the fire to consume the sacrifices. Elijah, being the gentleman that he is, turns to the prophets of Baal and Asherah and says, "Ladies first." And so they shouted, they limped around, which I can only assume refers to the dance style. Now, before you laugh at that, remember, we had the Harlem Shake back in 2013. They cut themselves and they raved or acted crazy for 6 to 9 hours. That's from morning to noon, and then from noon until the offering of oblation, which was around 3 o'clock. Elijah even made fun of them while they were doing this. He said, "Shout louder," or maybe he's thinking, or he's going to the bathroom, or he's on a trip, or maybe he's asleep. And no answer from Baal. Now it's Elijah's turn. He has the sacrifice completely soaked with water multiple times. He then prays a short 2-sentence prayer, and God sends fire from heaven that burns up the sacrifice and the altar and evaporates all the water around it. The Israelites acknowledge that the Lord is God and obey Elijah's order to execute the 850 false prophets. Elijah says, "Now it will rain," and it does. That is what we call a great day in ministry. But then, chapter 19. After this great victory, Queen Jezebel threatens to have Elijah killed within the next 24 hours. And Elijah runs away scared. He feels like he's alone. He said that during the challenge in chapter 18, verse 22. He prays that God would take him to heaven now. He feels like he's failed and he has had enough. God tells Elijah basically, get back in the game, anoint a couple of kings and train your successor, Elisha. And he reminds him that he's not alone, that there are 7,000 who still follow God just as faithfully as Elijah did. So what can we take away from today's passage? First, sometimes it takes life getting really, really bad for us to see God at work in our lives. It took the widow's son dying and coming back from the dead to see that Elijah was truly a man of God. The blessing of the bottomless flour and oil jars didn't do that. And it's sad how easily we can take God's daily blessings for granted. It also took fire from heaven to convince many in Israel how powerless following Baal really was. Second, we all feel alone from time to time. Even Elijah, the great prophet of God who performed many miracles, quickly forgot the victory that he was just a part of when he was threatened by one person. He felt alone and he felt like quitting. Does that sound familiar? The truth is, Elijah was never alone in following God, and neither are you. Remember Obadiah and the 100 prophets that he was protecting? Remember the 7,000 others that God said had not bowed to Baal? Elijah was far from alone, and Elijah was just like us, James 5:17 says. He felt defeated and alone just like we do at times, and it took God's truth to correct his wrong feelings. My prayer for us today is that when we feel discouraged and alone, that we'd go back to God's truth to remind us that we're not, that we continue doing what we know is right, knowing our wrong feelings will get back on the right track soon. If you haven't done so already, please download our Through the Bible reading plan at aspericommunitychurch.org/throughthebible. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.